What's going on? I'm John, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing the most valuable lessons that I learned from reading The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Maas. Simply put, this book is all about rousing emotions in the hearts of your readers and using that emotional component to craft better stories. This book was filled with all sorts of lessons around this topic, but before we start on those lessons, why should you even care? What is the significance of rousing emotions in your reader? It's as simple as this. Readers want to feel emotions when reading stories. If you think about the stories that you've enjoyed the most likely those stories that you still remember roused strong emotions in you, which is why you remember them. For me, I remember when I was in high school and I was forced to read certain books. One of the ones that I read was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and I actually really enjoyed this book. And it's because of those strong emotions that it conjured that I still remember it today. And an example he gave that really resonated with me was the way he talked about genres. So let's see what he said. For me, emotional craft became a necessary study because I realized that in reading many manuscripts and also published novels, I was feeling a little. The high action of best-selling thrillers often left me cold. Speculative fiction engaged my imagination, but did not often touch my soul. Romance and women's fiction wallowed in feelings, but frequently left me feeling indifferent. Literary fiction can be the driest reading experience of all. Beautiful writing may sparkle like a diamond necklace, but sparkling isn't a feeling. The greatest wish of editors today is a strong voice, and that's fine, but even strong voices can fail to reach my heart. Strong writing doesn't automatically produce strong feelings. Paradoxically, poorly written novels can sometimes unsettle me, stir me to anger, or send me reaching for a tissue. In this passage, Donald Maas is making his case for the importance of feelings in story, and it is a way that I think a lot of us, especially me, who's read a bunch of different genres recently and has felt mixed feelings towards some of the books that I've read, can definitely relate to. I definitely need to improve at this, so I have used this book to cultivate a toolbox of lessons that I can use in the future. And those are the lessons I'm going to be sharing with you right here. I've ranked these lessons in order of importance, and the most important lesson is coming last, so stick around for that. First, lesson number 8. And this is a lesson that I think most people don't even think about, including myself. I have definitely been blind to this one. And this lesson is cascading change. Simply said, changing one of your characters will naturally have effects on the characters around them, the characters that are close to them. There will be characters that influence your protagonist, and likewise, your protagonist will influence the characters close to them. This is definitely one that I missed in the first draft of my novel, so I'm going to have to go back at some point and make sure to include this. And the main way to do this is to focus on this one extra aspect. Think about how the characters are affecting each other. For example, in most stories, the protagonist is going to change over the course of the book. And if this protagonist is changing, other characters are noticing these changes most likely, and what is happening within those characters because of seeing this change. Are they deciding to change as well? Lesson number 7. This is all about failure and defeat. Some of the most powerful moments in any story are those moments where a character is failing and having to suffer the consequences of that failure. I'm sure you can think of some of these moments, the moments where you're reading and you don't even want to continue reading because you know something bad is about to happen and you just feel like, oh God, it's going to be so terrible. This lesson is all about amplifying those moments of defeat and making them painful enough that the reader can feel them too. There are plenty of ways to do this, but a few are making it personal to the POV character. How does failing at this affect them personally? Making it so that they have somebody else counting on them in this moment. Who do they not want to let down? And how can you show that person's disappointment as painfully as possible for the POV character? Let the reader know what it feels like to be failing at that moment. The moment that the character has the realization that they are going to fail, that something is going wrong, that this is not going to end up well. Let the reader know what the character wishes that they could do instead or say instead. And lastly, and probably most painfully for many of us, I mean, there is that most common fear of public speaking after all, make this moment of failure public. Make it so other people know about it, so other people see it, and so the character can feel that embarrassment, that humiliation at this moment. And one of the important parts of these failures is how they make the characters feel about themselves. And this is what Donald Maas says about it. As in life, in fiction, there are, or can be, moments of challenge, reckoning, betrayal, setback, and coming up short. What happens to your protagonist's sense of self at each of these moments? Each is an opportunity. Lesson number 6 is pushing high moments higher. I think a lot of us naturally struggle with these very emotional moments of the story. We write them, and then when we're reading them back, something about them just feels off. There's just something missing. Even if they're technically correct, there's nothing wrong with the writing, Something is just not there. And that is what we're going to talk about right now. When talking about high moments, Donald Maas is referring to these naturally emotional moments, moments of forgiveness, sacrifice, betrayal, moral dilemma, and death. To make each of these emotions as strong as possible, Donald Maas gives a specific recommendation for the emotion and for amplifying each of them. So let's just go through each of these. So if your character needs to forgive somebody, make the act that person has done unforgivable. Give the character valid reasons why they shouldn't forgive this person. To amplify the emotion of sacrifice, make the person in need of sacrifice as desperate as possible, so that when they finally get a break in their life, the reader can feel the relief with them. To amplify betrayal, make it as personal as possible. Make the betrayer as close to the betrayee as possible. And also make the revelation of that betrayal when the character finds out as painful as possible. When creating moral dilemmas, make the choice impossible. Make both sides of the choice equally good or bad. Make the consequences on both sides equally great or terrible. And lastly, if you're killing off a character, make the reader love them first. This feeling of loving the character will make the moment where they have to go painful for the reader because they miss them as if they were missing a real person. Also, I actually did try using this last one with death in a recent piece of flash fiction that I wrote. It was very difficult to use because I was giving myself a limit of 500 words, and also I had a lot of other things I needed to accomplish in those 500 words, but this was still a powerful lesson, and I think it made the piece of short fiction much better than it was previous to this change. Lesson number 5. The emotional hook. And in explaining this lesson, I think that Donald Maas reveals one of the most important ideas in this entire book. And this is the idea of intrigue versus involvement. The way that he explained this in the book was so good that I'm just going to read a few of those passages and give a little bit of commentary along the way. So let's do that. So he says, most important, they want to feel as if they're connected with the story's characters, living their fictional experience. Creating that as-if experience takes more than just walking readers through the plot. Readers retain a story only when they have felt it. Feeling can be provoked by plot developments, obviously, but only to a limited extent. Plot twists and turns mostly cause simple surprise. And I think this example really resonates for us because most of us have experienced this feeling of surprise. And it is entertaining, but if this surprise is colored with another emotion because of the impact of this change on the character, then that's when we really start to feel something. And he actually gives another example a little bit later on about the difference between thrillers and romances that I think makes this a little bit more clear. Thrillers and romances are at opposite ends of the spectrum, pure intrigue versus pure emotional involvement. However, the combination that is the most effective in producing reader involvement is equal doses of both. So the main key to using both involvement and intrigue in your opening is to make sure that you are bonding the readers with characters early on, as well as creating that moment of intrigue. To bond readers to the character, find something that the character cares about, some sort of value that is honorable, that this character is striving to care for or protect. The example he gives from the book is from The Hunger Games, where he talks about the opening scene where Katniss is wondering where her sister went. She's feeling these emotions of fear around the upcoming reaping and her sister not being there next to her. This is obviously appealing to the value of family, and Katniss is drawing us in because we can understand how she feels at this moment. We can imagine feeling those same feelings for family. And next, make sure your opening scene contains something strange, different, odd, or just intriguing in general. And if we're going back to that same example of Katniss, this is the word, the reaping. Like, what does that mean? It sounds ominous. And she's obviously worried about her sister. So how does that relate to this idea of the reaping? So by using both these emotions of intrigue and involvement, you're able to pull the reader into the story much more strongly than with just one of these emotions. And if you found that useful, make sure to smash that like button so that YouTube knows to share with other writers like you. Next, lesson number 4 is high-minded emotions. And this is the one that always gets me the most. Someone doing the right thing in a tough situation never fails to move me. So I found this lesson to be important because I definitely want to use this in my own stories. So in order to create these moments, Donald Maas talks about designing good deeds. Let's just go through a few of these steps here. First of all, find something good that the POV character would find difficult to do. Second, find more ways to make that even more difficult for them to do in this particular situation. Try to make it as difficult for them to do as possible and make them follow through with it anyway. And this topic of high-minded emotions actually comes right around one of the more interesting lines of this book, one that really stood out to me. Donald Maas says, "What happens when a protagonist doesn't act virtuously? What is lost? Unfortunately, what's lost is readers' respect for the protagonist. That's crucial. because whether or not your protagonist is a good person matters to readers. It's the first thing they look for and a prerequisite for their involvement in your story. Here's the part that really stood out to me. Anti-heroes and dark protagonists would seem to be an exception, but not really. When they work, it's a trick. Dark characters we care about secretly signal something to us. However bad they may seem, underneath, they are good. Okay, so I've saved two of the best lessons up until now, and these lessons are using external and internal revelation of a character's feelings. First, let's go into number 3, external. And the only reason that I ranked external lower than internal is because I personally like a really close perspective, so I'm more likely to use internal than external. But external definitely has its uses, and one of the benefits discussed in this book is that you can use external revelation to reveal emotions that would be very difficult for the reader. In the book, he talks about the example of a person who is struggling with mental illness, and their emotions are so strong and powerful that it would be very difficult to relate to inside of their head. And seeing them from this external perspective makes it easier for the readers to have a little bit of distance from them, and this makes it easier for the reader to process and feel these emotions. So that's one of the benefits of using external revelation. The way that you actually use it is, for the most part, using subtext. So first, gather some necessary details. For example, figure out all the possible emotions your POV character is feeling at the time. Brainstorm ways your POV character can act out these feelings. Add a detail of setting that they're noticing which is unique to them and that they're only able to notice, or that they're only noticing because of their emotional state at the time. And lastly, use these details to write this moment, conveying the emotion to the reader with subtext. And finally, we've made it to one of the most interesting ones for me, which is telling. Having the character tell the reader what they're feeling in a way that will actually elicit feelings from the reader. The main key that Donald Maas talks about here is delving deeper than the surface level feelings. What he talks about doing is asking yourself, okay, what's the primary emotion that the character is feeling at this moment? Throw that one away. Ask again, what's the secondary emotion that they're feeling? Throw that one away, and then ask, what is the third emotion that they're feeling? Now use this third lower level emotion to convey the character's emotions to the reader. The way that he describes doing this is first, creating an analogy to describe how the character's feeling, deciding if this feeling is good or bad morally, talking about what a better person would feel in this situation, justifying why the character feels this way instead of feeling like the better person would feel, and also figuring out a detail from the scene that the POV character would notice because of the way they're feeling that other characters may not notice. And lastly, using all these elements together to write a passage for the story, conveying this third lower level emotion to the reader. And the last and most important lesson is where enjoyment from reading comes from. The way this is described in the book is really good, so I'm just going to leave it up to Donald Maas to tell you. Donald Maas argues that reader enjoyment comes from books that make them think, question, guess at what's going to happen next, and compare the character's experience with their own experience. He sums it up this way. What all that means is that your readers fundamentally want to feel something, not about your story, but about themselves. They want to play. They want to anticipate, guess, think, and judge. They want to finish the story and feel competent. They want to feel like they've been through something. They want to connect with your characters and live their fictional experience, or believe that they have. And although this is not really a specific technique, this really resonated with me because I could see how this happened in my own experience with reading, how the books that I really enjoyed were the ones that made me think, that made me feel something different, that gave me an experience that challenged me. Those are the books that I really enjoyed, and those are the books that I remembered. And I'm curious, is there a novel you've been reading recently that has made you feel these sorts of feelings, that has challenged you, that has made you think in a different way, that has made you reflect on your own experience? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're looking for writing craft books with amazing lessons, then you'll definitely want to check out the video that I made about The Anatomy of Story by John Truby and the 10 best lessons I learned from it. You can check it out here. Okay, I haven't done one of those in a while.